It's the Harlem Renaissance, a time of culture, music, literature, and art, giving it the name the Roaring Twenties. But underneath this lies the infamous island, Alcatraz, whose limits go no boundaries. Alcatraz was originally a naval base in 1907 and was designated as the Pacific branch of U.S. military prison. In 1933, Alcatraz was transferred to the control of the U.S. Department of Justice from 1934 to 1963. Alcatraz could hold 450 convicts, but never held more than 250. Famous criminals that ended up in Alcatraz were Al Capone, Robert Stroud, George Kelly, and two of the sons of Ma Barker. Alcatraz was regarded as one of the safest places with many guards and jail cells, despite the worst criminals living there. Al Capone, probably the most well-known criminal of the time, was born in 1899 and grew up in Manhattan. He quit school at age 14 and eventually joined the most famous and dangerous gang in New York, the 5 Point Gang. He was nicknamed Scarface from the scratches he had on his face from a fight at the Harvard Inn, where he had been working as a bartender. Capone was arrested in New York for murder, but since nobody was said to have seen anything, Capone was released. Capone moved to Chicago, the place where he would become most famous. He became a bootlegger, or underground producer and seller of alcohol, in the 1920s during the Prohibition. After years of bootlegging and trouble, the Chicago police ran him out of the city. Capone moved to Florida, but remained active in Chicago. Valentine's Day was a dreadful day in 1929, when Capone's gang killed 6 members of the rival North Side gang. Capone was never charged on the incident because he claimed to have been in Florida. Despite all of his incidents, Capone was a very honorable and generous man. After the stock market crashed in 1929, Capone was the first to open up a soup kitchen and give free clothes to the needy. Capone was sent to court again in 1929 for federal tax evasion, and the judge sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison and 1 in a county jail. He was sentenced to prison in Atlanta, but was moved to Alcatraz, the tightest and most safely guarded prison in the country. There were many rebellions and strikes in Alcatraz, but Capone refused to take part in any of them because he thought he might be able to get time off for good behavior. After 11 years, he was released and spent the rest of his life peacefully away from trouble until he died in 1947. Robert Stroud was born in 1890 in Seattle, Washington. At age 13, he ran away from home. By 18, he was in Juneau, Alaska. An argument caused him to kill a man. He pled guilty to manslaughter in 1909 and was convicted to 12 years in federal prison at McNeil Island on Puget Sound. After stabbing another prisoner in jail, he was transferred to Leavenworth Prison in Kansas in 1912. In 1916, he killed a guard and was convicted and sentenced to hang. He was given the death penalty, but President Wilson continued his sentence to life imprisonment in solitary confinement. Stroud began raising birds and collecting laboratory equipment and was given the nickname the Birdman. He studied the diseases of birds and their care. In 1942, he was transferred to Alcatraz, where he stayed for 17 years, while he continued to study birds. In 1959, he was transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners at Springfield, Missouri, until his death in 1963. George Kelly, born in 1897, came from a wealthy Southern family. He did poorly in school and became a bootlegger, kidnapper, murderer, and bank robber as he joined headline gangs. He married Catherine Shannon, an outlaw herself, and began robbing banks. She bought him a machine gun and wanted him to perfect it. He got so good with the gun that he was nicknamed Machine Gun Kelly. Kelly and his wife kidnapped Charles Urschel, an oil tycoon, and they demanded a ransom. Urschel, being very smart, mentally recorded everything that happened so that the police could investigate and sentence Kelly to prison. After Urschel was freed, the Kellys were forced to flee and go into hiding. The police found him, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He went to Alcatraz in 1934, where he became an altar boy at the prison's chapel, and lived a fairly quiet rest of his life behind bars. Ma Barker gave birth to 4 sons, Herman, Lloyd, Doc, and Fred. Ma Barker and her sons robbed banks and terrorized the Midwest. During the 20 years of her gang, they killed over a dozen people. Despite owning $3 million from bank robberies, The Barker gang kidnapped a wealthy banker named Edward Bremer, but realized it was a bad idea when the father of the banker was friends with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The gang decided to split up, but Ma and Fred were killed while hiding in Florida. Doc Barker was captured and was eventually sent to Alcatraz, where he tried to escape before being shot. The first escape attempt occurred on April 27, 1936. While burning trash in the incinerator, Joe Bowers began climbing a chain-link fence at the edge of the island. He was shot after refusing to come back down. On December 16, 1937, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe traveled through flat iron bars at the window of their cell and made it all the way to the water of the San Francisco Bay, where they were presumed to have drowned in the water. On January 13, 1939, Doc Barker, who was the son of Ma Barker, and 4 other prisoners, escaped from the isolation unit by sawing through iron jail bars. While bending the bars on the window, they made their way down to the water's edge. 3 prisoners surrendered, while 2, including Barker, were shot. Barker died from the gunshot. The Battle of Alcatraz in 1946 and the Great Escape from Alcatraz in 1962 were the 2 biggest escape attempts. The Battle of Alcatraz was a 2-day battle between the guards and the prisoners of Alcatraz with many casualties. The Coast Guard had to step in and end this long battle. The Great Escape from Alcatraz was planned for 6 months. It involved 4 prisoners who had to make a hole in their furnace, create decoy dummies, and water rafts. 3 of the prisoners ended up continuing with their plan, and they were never seen again. They either made it to the land, or they drowned in the San Francisco Bay. The 1920s were a time of great culture and pride. However, in 1929 the stock market crashed, beginning the 1930s Great Depression era. Famous criminals rose in these decades, including Al Capone. Alcatraz, although existing as a federal jail for only 19 years, had so much history and events. Today Alcatraz is opened as a tourist attraction, where people can exhibit the major criminals' cells and life in prison.